Welcome to this week's video where we are going to talk about hobbying with children. See you after this. Okay, welcome back. So this week I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to talk about hobbying with children, whether you're a teacher starting or working in a school and you're starting a hobby club, or whether you are a parent whose children are kind of getting into the hobby and you're not really sure where to start. I'm hoping this video will give you some tips, will help you out a little bit with things that I've learned from running the fighting writing workshops. If you're a parent that's already massively into the hobby, you're probably going to have a lot of these answers anyway, but stick around, there might be something that you've not really thought about. I've split the video up into sections to try and make it a little bit easier. I wasn't sure whether to start with like miniatures or whether to start with the different games that you pick. It's really hard because I think some people go into this for the gaming aspect and some people are going into this for the painting of miniatures aspect. And they can be quite different, they can be linked together. So I will talk about both of those as we go through. I'm also going to assume that you don't have access to a 3D printer. I know some schools are starting to buy printers now, but they tend to be filament 3D printers rather than resin. And they're great for terrain, but they're not so great for printing really detailed figures unless you've got them really dialed in. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to assume that you haven't got a 3D printer. Doesn't mean we're not going to talk about 3D printed minis, but I'm going to assume that you don't have access to one. So we will start with talking about minis, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, one of the main things you're going to be thinking about when it comes to starting your hobby club or hobbying with your children is the miniatures or minis that you're going to be painting and playing with. And there are so many different things to think about with this. The first thing is cost. Okay, you've kind of got two main options. So you've got Games Workshop, who do Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, Warhammer 40k and all their various different games to do with that. Or you've got one of the many 3D printed suppliers. And there are tons of people online designing 3D miniatures or designing miniatures that can be 3D printed. Some of them have got their own game system, like one-page rules, which is really good. Some of them are just doing figures for things like Dungeons and Dragons and so on. But they're all out there as options for you to buy. So you can either buy them from Games Workshop or you can buy them from 3D printer sites. Now Etsy is one of the most common ones. There are loads of sellers on Etsy selling 3D printed figures. I have bought some from there. They're great. I've got a 3D printer now, so I kind of print my own. But the big difference between them is the cost. So if you buy something from Games Workshop, you'll get a box of miniatures like this. These are some Skaven Pestilent Plague Monks. And a box like this will cost you 20 something pounds for, in this one, 20 miniatures. If you buy them online, if you buy 3D printed ones, these are some 3D printed Saurus Warriors that I've bought, and they, I think, cost about £5 for 10, so they're about half the price. There are differences between both of them. Part of the problem with resin figures is that they are quite brittle, so they will break really easily. So if you're playing as a hobby club with school and you've got a lot of children handling them, a lot of children playing with them, they are going to tend to break quite easily. For instance, this is a 3D printed mummy that I run for the fighting writing, and as you can see, one of its arms has snapped off. No idea where that is now. It's fallen off in one of the schools and it's gone for good. You get a lot of ankle snaps. This zombie here you can see has just snapped off. I think it's now 90% super glue on the ankles. So they do break. So that is something to bear in mind if you are going to buy resin figures to work with children. Children get excited, they get really involved with them, and they're all accidentally broken, but they do break. Whereas the plastic figures that you get from Games Workshop tend to be a little bit tougher. Now, there are still some exceptions to this, and this kind of leads me into the next point, that you need to really think about the figures that you are going to buy for the children who are going to be painting them. Some are better than others. They're not all created equally, even within the Games Workshop ones. Now, I started getting back into the hobby big time in kind of 2019 with Seraphon, which is lizard men. And my daughter wanted to get involved as well. I think she was probably about 8 at the time. And so I mistakenly says, right, let's have a look at the Games Workshop website. What kind of army are you into? Let's have a look, see what you like. Let's buy them. And she picked an army called Sylvaneth. And these are Sylvaneth. And this was 3 years ago. And you can see now how much paint they have had applied by her. And part of the problem is they are just so intricate. They are ridiculously detailed. They're delicate. They will break as soon as you look at them. They were just a really bad choice for kind of first miniatures to paint, which is why I think a lot of first timers go for things like Space Marines, because they are big and chunky and very simple surfaces. It's the same with these, the Stormcast Eternals. They are really good. They're really solid. They don't break. They've not got any kind of delicate bits on them like these Sylvaneth that might snap. And the big solid surfaces are much easier for somebody who's beginning to paint. So that's something worth considering. Whether you go for 3D printed figures, whether you go for Games Workshop figures, is to think about the actual miniatures that you are buying. How easy are they going to be to paint? How delicate are they going to be? Are they going to break really easily? Are they going to be constantly need to be being fixed? Even some of the ones like the Seraphon, which I take out into schools, which are here, the figures are absolutely fine, but you can see here the back end of the spear has broken off. So there are still bits that are going to break off if they're getting handled a lot. And if you're running a hobby club in school, they are going to get handled a lot. And that's okay, that's fine. But you've just got to be aware that they're going to break every now and then. And that's why sometimes the cheaper resin figures are better to start with. Having said that, I want to talk to you about something called the Warhammer Alliance. The Warhammer Alliance is a club that Games Workshop run, as far as I'm aware, across the world. I know you can definitely apply in the UK, Australia, Canada and the United States. I think most of Europe as well. And as a school or as a scouts group or a guides group, you can apply to the Warhammer Alliance, and I'll put the link in the description below, and they will send you a starter pack for free. And in that starter pack there are figures. I think there's 48 figures off the top of my head. I think you get 10 paints. You get a load of brushes, and you get some boards to play on. I think you get some dice as well and some measurement rulers. So you get everything really that you needed to start that hobby club, and it doesn't cost anything. So that is a great way to kind of start to build this up and start to look at what interests your children, kind of what kind of take up you've got with it as well. And it reduces the cost as well quite considerably. So that is definitely something worth looking into applying for, and that's called the Warhammer Alliance. Like I say, I'll put the link below, but it's a great way to get started, and they will send you the standard miniatures that come with that, so that you can kind of get a feel for how it works in your school. The other thing to think about with figures when you're buying them with the minis is how they arrive. So 3D printed ones tend to arrive like this in little bags. They are printed out of resin. The resin is toxic when it's liquid. You might read about that, but once it's cured, so once it's printed, it's absolutely fine. Do your own risk assessment, of course, but it's absolutely safe. They tend to arrive like this in little bits and pieces. Some of them will have little tiny bits on them where it has printed, so the supports from where it's printed you can just see there, hopefully between the legs if that's focusing, and see these lines, but they literally just push off, and that's it. It's nice and easy, so there's just a very minimal cleanup before you paint, whereas Games Workshop stuff comes on these plastic sprues. And the problem with the plastic sprues is that everything is numbered, so when you put them together from the instructions, you have to cut them out as you go. You can't really cut out the whole box, put them in a bowl and say to the children, go on, build them, because they won't know which bit is which. They won't fit together nicely. The other thing is, because they're on here, you will need something like snips like these to cut them out. Scissors, you could probably use scissors, but they're not quite as good. And these are probably no more dangerous than scissors, but it's something that you would need to risk assess, you'd need to have a think about. And once you cut them out, you will end up with bits on the item, on the piece. So you've got little bits along here that need to be shaved down. The kind of normal tool of the trade for that would be a craft knife or a scalpel. You're probably not going to be using that with children. Another good thing to go to is nail files. So if you've got the cardboard nail files or the foam nail files, they work really well at just getting off those bits and the mold lines where they've been cast, and things like that, and just making them a little bit smoother to stick together. Sometimes those things are important because they won't actually fit together if those lines are still there. Whether you go for the Games Workshop plastic or the resin, you are going to need some glue to stick them together. If you're using resin, the only glue really that will work is super glue. It doesn't have to be this brand, any kind of brand of super glue will do. If you're going for the plastic stuff from Games Workshop, then this Tamiya plastic cement is great stuff. This actually melts the plastic slightly so that when you push it together and it hardens, it forms a plastic bond between them. This won't work with resin, but it does work brilliantly with plastic. So you're going to need one or the other. Again, you've got to kind of make that decision as to which glue or how you use that glue in your environment. If you're working with your own children, that's quite an easy decision to make. You know, you can guide them through there. If you're using it in a school, you are going to need to risk assess that. You're going to need to have a think about how you approach that. Maybe you cut out and glue all the figures together ready, and then the children just paint them. But it also depends on the age of the children that you are working with. So whether you're buying Games Workshop or whether you're going for the 3D printed models, just think about how easy they're going to be to paint. You know, I think if I had given my daughter, instead of something like this, if I had given her something like this, then these would probably be painted by now. You know, she's lost complete interest in those now. They're not going to be painted. I'll have to try something different if she's still interested. But think about how easy they are going to be to paint, how well they're going to handle, and how well they're going to stand up to being kind of played with by overexcited kids. Are they going to break? Are they going to snap easily? You know, try and choose something that looks quite solid in the pictures. There's no right or wrong answer. You know, the Games Workshop ones have got the advantage of there's loads of painting schemes online. On the Games Workshop website, there are loads of photos that kind of give the kids an idea of how to paint them. You don't have that with the 3D printed ones. On the other hand, the 3D printed ones are a lot cheaper. If you go for something like the Warhammer Alliance, that removes that cost implication for a beginning. That's a great way to get it started. But hopefully that's just given you a little bit of something to think about when choosing the miniatures. Next up, we're going to have a look at how to get started with them once you've kind of stuck them together. Okay, so you've put all the figures together, you've glued them, you've snipped them and all that kind of stuff. Now we need to have a look at everything else that you're going to need for the club. So the first thing, you're going to need some snips of some description. I know this comes a little bit before you kind of glue them together, but you will need something to kind of just clip them down. These things aren't expensive. I'll put some links to all of the tools I kind of recommend in the description below. Painting, I'm going to do a whole video about different types of paints, so I'm not going to touch too much on that now. But you will need to undercoat them. That's a job really for the adult to do, because you need to use spray cans really for that. You can use an airbrush, but again, I'm going to assume, a bit like a 3D printer, that you haven't got an airbrush at school or at home. You can get spray cans from Games Workshop. They do lots of their own colours. You can get them from Army Painter. Any undercoat, any primer spray can will do. You can get stuff from Poundland in the Pound Shop, I think, for about £2 a can. Whereas the Games Workshop and the Army Paint stuff is about £11 a can. Certainly to begin with, I would go for the cheaper stuff, just because it doesn't make that much difference when you're beginning to paint. It makes a bit more of a difference when you get a bit better and you start to use different types of paints. But in the beginning, it really doesn't. You just want something to give an adhesive layer to your figure so that the paints you're going to put on with a brush later actually stick to it. So for undercoating, I would recommend getting the cheap prime cans that you can, you know, greys, whites are fine, blacks are fine. I normally go for grey or white. I know people that religiously stick to black. Again, it's only personal preference, really doesn't matter. For most of the paints you're going to stick on, you'll be covering it up anyway. So just go for whatever you can get that is cheap. I would recommend getting some nail files. Like I said, they can help with taking the little bits off the edge of the miniatures. They can take the mold lines off, things like that. The most important thing when it comes to equipment is going to be your paintbrushes. Now, again, the Warhammer Alliance will send you some if you sign up for the Warhammer Alliance, but you are probably going to have to buy some paintbrushes at some point. This is quite contentious. There are some people that argue that kind of the really expensive paintbrush is the best. I disagree completely. I think that certainly for the level that your beginner hobbyists are going to be painted at, cheap paintbrushes are absolutely fine. Now, these are some of my favourites. I got these from Amazon. Again, I'll put the link below. I like the big bulgy bit of the handle. I find it easier to hold for long periods of time. I think for children with poor fine motor skills, they're much better. They give them something bigger to grip, a bit like a pencil grip in school. And these were about £6 for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 brushes. Okay, so they're not expensive to bulk buy. The only problem with buying a set is that you kind of get one of each size. And you're going to sometimes need a fine brush, you're going to sometimes need a much bigger brush. So you kind of only get in 1 or 2 children's worth of brushes for this. If you go to the works or places like that, they do sets again like this, which has the same problem of all of the different styles, but they do sets of all size 3 brushes. And I think I paid £1 the other day. I'm annoyed I can't find where I've put the pack I bought a couple of days ago. But you can buy a pack of a particular size. If you are buying particular sizes, I would recommend going for the kind of mid-range ones, a bit like this, so kind of a size 3, maybe a size 2. Something like this is probably going to be too big, but something like the absolute fine detail ones that you get in here is probably going to be a little bit small for starting, for beginning. The reason I say go for cheap ones is because they get absolutely hammered. They get battered. You know, these are some of my old ones now. This was dry brush. I know that, so it kind of got absolutely hammered as well. But this is just a normal brush that's been had on the end. A lot of them will end up with this, I don't know if it will focus, this kind of tip curl. And that's where you get the brush, you're washing it out, you leave it sat in the water glass or the water jar or whatever, and it just kind of sits and curls the thing. With that in mind, water spills. So if you've got a water jar that you are kind of washing your brushes in, that is going to spill. It's going to get knocked over. Hand sanitizer, of which we're all very familiar now, is a great brush cleaner. If you've just got a little pot of hand sanitizer, they can wash the brush in there, it'll get the paint off, it'll dry off really quickly. We know how quickly hand sanitizer dries off your hands. And if they knock it over, it's not going to spill everywhere. And if it does, it kind of wipes up a lot easier than a big glass of water. So hand sanitizer is a really good brush cleaning medium when you're painting in general, but when you're painting with kids as well, and it will look after your brushes as well. So there really isn't a huge amount with brushes. You just want to think about the fact that they are going to get destroyed, so you don't want to be spending lots and lots of money on them. A lot of the brushes that you get in school catalogues and things like that tend to be quite big for painting minis. If you think, again, if you've made the mistake like I did and you've gone for something like this, a big school brush is not going to get the kind of fine detail that they are looking for. You want something a little bit smaller. So go cheap, go bulk, and then you're not going to worry about replacing them when they wear out. Right, so you want to play a game with your kid, with your hobby club, whatever it is. Where do you start? There are loads of games. I mean, we'll go through the Games Workshop games, because they're the kind of entry point, the gateway game for a lot of people. But there are things like one-page rules, which is free to get the rules. You can kind of download them from the One Page Rules website. You can buy their figures from places like Etsy if you want to use those. But if you do want to stick with the Games Workshop stuff, you've got big games like Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40k. I wouldn't recommend them as a starting point. They're too complicated, they're too big, you need too much space, you need too many figures. It just won't work. For fighting writing, for the workshops that I run, I have made the rules completely simple. I've just stripped back everything. And I've got rid of things like magic and stuff like that for now, although I am kind of toying with the idea of adding it back for narrative effect. But it is basically you move and you attack. The closest game that's out there that you can get to that, I think, is Warcry, which is by Games Workshop. And that is a small skirmish game. Again, you need a handful of figures. You probably need about 6 or 7 figures for each team to start, which can get quite expensive. But if you adapt the rules, then it becomes much easier. And what I will do after I've uploaded this video is I will put the fighting writing rules up on the fighting writing website, link in description. And so you can go there and you can kind of see how I have simplified it to make it really easy for children to pick up quickly and get playing. Because what you don't want to be doing necessarily is spending hours and hours and hours learning rules to play. Warcry is very simple. The only problem with Warcry is that you need quite a few figures still, which can get quite expensive. With the fighting writing, you only need 3 per side, 3 miniatures per side. So if you've got a box like this, for instance, with 20 in, even though they would probably all be using the same kind of character, if you just use that box, you've got almost 7 teams coming out of there of 3. So you've got a lot of games that you could be playing at once. So I'll put those up, and I will put up some downloadable printable marker things and things like that. It will take a while. They probably won't be up for a couple of weeks. But Warcry is worth looking at. You can find the rules to Warcry online. I think that you can find them for free on the Warhammer community website. But it's keeping it really simple. And don't be afraid to change the rules. If the children are finding it complicated, simplify it to get them into it. Because once they're into it, then they will start to play, and they can start to play with the kind of full rules. I remember when I was a kid, me and my dad used to play old Warhammer Fantasy, and we never really got round to playing with the full rules. We never really got round to playing with magic and things like that, or different kind of targets or aims for the game. It was just a case of put our armies on, attack each other, see who comes out on top at the end of it. And it was great fun. So something as simple as that is a great way to start. You don't have to jump in. You know, if you get Warcry, it comes with kind of quest cards, it comes with special rules, it comes with different things to tweak each individual game, it comes with outcomes, it comes with objectives. And that's all great, and it makes for a great game, but it is quite complicated. If you're sitting down with a group of 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds and you want them to just pick it up and play, they need something a little bit simpler. So you might decide, you know what, we're just going to use the board, we're just going to look at how we move and how we attack, and that's it. So the rules for that are fairly simple. It's just involving a couple of dice, and you can get them into the idea of role-playing, because there's so many different kind of links to the curriculum with this. If you're working in a school, you know, the PHSE links with sharing, turn-taking, being happy for each other, all of that kind of stuff, you know, dealing with the anger and the emotion, the frustration when you're losing. So the main point is getting them involved in playing the game. It doesn't have to be to the strict rules. You know, this isn't tournament play. This isn't a competition where you're playing against the best players in the world. It is just a case of getting them playing. So don't be afraid to simplify the rules. You can start off with something like Warcry. You could even look at an older game like Mordheim, although that can get quite complicated. But just for those basic rules, if you've never played the hobby, if you've never played a tabletop war game, then you're not going to know where to start. So simplifying the rules is a great way. You know, if you have played lots of games, then I'm sure you can come up with your own rules to kind of pick it up from the start. That's what I did with fighting writing. But don't overcomplicate it. Don't be worried about changing the rules. Have a look at Warcry. The other skirmish games, things like Kill Team for Warhammer 40k is really complicated. Necromunda's quite complicated. Warcry is nice and simple. So I would have a look at that one. Finally, you need to think about what you're going to play on. Okay, so the Warhammer Alliance set comes with some battle boards, but you're probably going to want to build some bits for the children to play around. You know, that's why perhaps you found this channel to see how to build things. You know, we've got a lot of houses, arenas, things like that. schools are really good at this anyway, but one of the best things you can do is start collecting rubbish. So all of the bits like tubs, cans, you know, this is all covered in a bit of plaster dust because it's in the shed that I'm building at the minute. Toys like these pipes, you know, they all come in handy when it comes to making your own terrain, whether it's kind of medieval style houses, whether it's futuristic silos or factories or things like that. Saving bits like that you're about to throw out. Old toys are great. That, you know, if your reception class or year one are about to throw out a load of old toys, go through them, see if there are like mechanical bits that you can take, cogs and wheels and kind of buttresses and scaffolding and all of that kind of stuff, and save those. Cardboard boxes, cardboard tubes, you know, all the usual kind of Blue Peter stuff that we would have saved as children to build Tracy Island or whatever. All of those things are going to go in really handy to make terrain pieces. I'll do a few videos over the coming months about things like how you can make trees from natural twigs and things like that you'll find on the school grounds. The more you start to save, and the kids will get involved with that as well. They'll want to bring in stuff from home. They'll want to collect stuff around the home if you're working with your own children. It gives a real good sense of ownership for the stuff that you are building. So yeah, save all that stuff and start to use it to make bits for the figures to play around. And it's more painting as well. It's something else that they can paint when it's finished. Okay, hopefully that has been useful for you. If you have any other recommendations or suggestions, definitely put them in the comments below for everybody else to read. That would be great. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Have you made any mistakes? Have you had any great ideas when you've started running a hobby club at school or when you've started with your own children? What's worked? What hasn't worked? I will put a load of links to the stuff in the description below if you want to go and buy any of the bits. There will be affiliate links to Amazon, so if you do click those, the channel just gets a little bit of money. It doesn't cost you any more. The money comes out of Amazon's pocket, so you pay the same. We just get a little bit of a kickback, or I get a little bit of a kickback here, which is always helpful, helps me to keep making this kind of content. So do use those links if you are going to buy any of the stuff. That'd be a real help. The next video then, I'm going to have a look at painting and the different types of paints that you might buy, why some of them work better than others, and we'll have a little bit of a painting example with those as well. So until then, stay safe and I'll see you next time.